is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to another great episode of the program, The Bridge, on US Arab Radio. Journalists have been facing incredible challenges over the year 2023, and many conflicts have been unfolding globally and internationally, as well as regionally. Of course, the war on Ukraine, the crisis in Gaza, and many others. To discuss this very important and timely topic, I'm going to have an interesting and lively conversation today with my esteemed guests. Mr. Sherif Mansour is the Middle East and North Africa Program Coordinator with the Committee to Protect Journalists, and Mr. Younes is a veteran Arab American journalist who has been covering the Middle East and US politics for a long time. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you
for having us.
Sherif, I'll start with you. You have been on The Bridge and on US Arab Radio before, but for those guests who have not been tuning in to our conversations before, can you just give them a quick and brief idea about the work of Committee to Protect Journalists, please?
Sure. We're a US-based, even New York-based organization. We defend journalists worldwide, and we've been documenting specifically cases of killed journalists since 1992. We, of course, defend journalists' right to speak up, and freedom of speech is central to our work.
Excellent. Now, I want you to give our listeners and viewers, please, a brief idea about the situation of journalists and the threats that have been facing journalists worldwide in the year 2023. What have been the numbers, the statistics, the most dangerous countries and regions, and whether we have seen any kind of shifts or changes in these trends, please?
Sure. I have been on your shows a couple of times discussing our annual reports, which includes the count of journalists who've been killed and imprisoned worldwide and in the Middle East. And from the Middle East, it's always been one of the worst offenders. And of course, the number of journalists who've been killed worldwide since I joined CPJ in 2011, half of them were killed in the Middle East. But also in past Gaza wars, and in every Gaza war, 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and during the Gaza protest of 2018, journalists were killed. And I think in many ways, when we have discussed, even the last time I talked to Shireen Abu Aqla, it was the time where we at the committee decided to kind of build a report. We called it Deadly Pattern. And we released it in May, 4 months before this war started. And we said that this deadly pattern of journalists, mainly Palestinian journalists, 90% killed by the IDF fire over 21 years, leaves particularly Palestinian journalists in a precarious, deadly environment, and that it could lead to a chilling effect about our ability to cover the Israeli army operations. And what we saw in this war is that the deadly pattern continued from 20 journalists being killed before this war by the Israeli army over 21 years to now more than 83 in Gaza in 4 months. Of course, there were also other things that we've documented, including the Israeli army disregarding of press insignia, and also lack of accountability. No one was ever held accountable, charged in the killings of journalists before this war or during this war. And when we released our report this year, it showed that 70% of journalists who were killed last year in 2023 were Palestinian journalists. And since the beginning of the war, and since last year, it's been 77 out of 99 journalists overall. And of course, these are because Palestinian journalists are bearing the brunt of the Israeli army fire that has killed in a matter of 3 months more than any army or entity have done in any single year on record since 1992. And it's also because Palestinian journalists are left alone bearing witness while international media have been muzzled and only allowed to enter Gaza since the beginning of the war in guided censored tours. And so far, only the Palestinian journalists are paying the ultimate price, mainly 83 journalists, but 2 Israeli journalists and 3 Lebanese journalists in this war.
We were going to talk specifically about Gaza, of course, in more depth and details as the conversation flows, Sherif. But if you want to also give our listeners and viewers, please, an overall view or overview of what the situation looked like for journalists internationally. I mean, the Middle East region, obviously, like you said, is the deadliest, and the Gaza crisis has been horrifically dangerous for journalists. And thanks for sharing some of these numbers and statistics, very eye-opening. Beside that, has there been some kind of changing trends? For example, some countries that used to be considered the worst jailers of journalists who have, shifted and changed their position to a better status, or vice versa. Countries that emerged at the top of the list that were not considered the worst jailers of journalists in the past. Like an overall view of the global situation, please.
So in addition to the killed report, we also do our prison census, which is our count of journalists behind bar in December every year. And for the first time, Israel was among our worst jailer of journalists worldwide, tying with number 6 with Iran, ahead of Egypt, Saudi, and even Turkey from neighboring countries. And this is because, as we said before the war, we warned of a chilling effect about our ability to cover IDF fire. We saw not just the deadly pattern continues, that chilling effect becoming news blackout, huge censorship, outright censorship in the West Bank that included arresting as many as 25 journalists and holding them mainly in administrative detention in military trials. Only 2 of them were charged of inciting of violence out of 25. At least 5 of them have been beaten and abused in custody. And even those who were released were journalists who were put in conditions that does not allow them to continue working. Some in house arrest and some without the ability of using communication or internet. This is, of course, one of the challenging trends, but of course, we highlighted, in addition to the number of those who were detained, dozens of cases, numerous attacks of obstruction, intimidation, and threat to local and international media in the West Bank and in Israel under a new security emergency legislation that allowed the Israeli government to shut down Palestinian radio and online news station in the West Bank, and shut down Hezbollah affiliate Al Mayadeen in Lebanon, and threaten and recently passed legislation to allow them to shut Al Jazeera. And all of these are happening under vague and suspicious accusation by the Israeli government of harming national morale or national security.
Very sad and grim situation indeed. Thank you, Sherif. I'll come to you, Ali, with the question about the performance of journalists. You're a veteran journalist yourself, and you've been covering the Middle East region and US politics for a long time. And my question to you is, when you look at 2023 as a year full of events and, unfortunately, conflicts and wars and all of that, how do you evaluate the performance of journalists amid all of these challenges globally, as well as specifically within the Gaza crisis?
Well, first of all, I think if we look at the journalists, the journalists or organizations we cannot separate them from the countries from which they are operating from. U.S. media organizations operate within the American cultural and political system. Europeans also are the same. They have the same environment. The global South, they have the same environment. And depending on the issue. And we saw in 2022 and 2023, when the Western media, US and European media covered the war in Ukraine, we saw how journalists and those media organizations covered that conflict in a way that was perceived as insulting to the global South or the Middle East, saying that, insinuating in a way that this is Europe and this is not the Middle East and this is not Africa. How could that happen here? So we saw that clearly, and the world saw that clearly, and some media organizations have apologized for that. So that perception of discriminatory cultural bias toward non-European or non-white conflicts, we saw that clearly. And the performance, took the lines of where you stand. If you're an American news organization, obviously you will be against Russian. So Russian or pro-Russian news organizations cover the conflict from a perspective of Russia, more or less. Now, when it comes to the Middle East, as you know, and as Sherif has said, the Middle East is not a free environment for journalists, neither in Israel and not as much in the Arab world, sadly speaking. In Israel and Gaza, over 130, Sherif maybe said 80 or 80 some, but the count has reached over 130 Palestinian journalists were killed in this conflict alone, not counting in the West Bank, not counting Shireen Abu Akleh before that. So the situation, as you said, is grim, is very tragic, and lacks accountability, like you said, and like what Sherif said, lacks accountability. And that leads people to think there are journalists, when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East, they don't have a lot of protections. Mm-hmm. They don't have people supporting them or countries advocating for their well-being or to hold Israel accountable, or Israel holding its soldier accountable for that matter. So, and in the Arab world as the Freedom House, or Amnesty or other international organizations, do not characterize the Middle East as an environment whereby journalists have a free access to information or can actually report without fearing for their lives or without being jailed. So the global environment for journalists is not friendly when it comes to the Middle East or the global South or India or Latin America, for that matter. We saw many investigative journalists were killed or imprisoned in Mexico or in Myanmar or in some other countries around the world. So it's a different kind of situation, depends where you stand in the world.
So a very grim picture overall, but particularly more dire in the Middle East, and especially in the context of the ongoing Gaza crisis. Very interesting discussion. We'll come back to this important discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
As the weather gets colder, it's a good idea to layer up with scarves, hats, and mittens. Another layer of protection this season is to get your flu and COVID-19 vaccines. You can get both vaccines at the same time. Talk to your healthcare provider or learn more at michigan.gov/COVID-flu-RSV and layer up for some added peace of mind. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Najee Abood 734-744-9796.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arab Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're discussing today a very important and timely topic: the challenges and threats facing journalists internationally in 2023 and within the ongoing Gaza crisis in particular. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic is Mr. Sherif Mansour and Mr. Ali Younes. Now, Sherif, I want to go back to you about the protections for journalists who are facing these types of very dire and grim situations we have been talking about before the break. Committee to Protect Journalists, as you defined it, is an organization that tries to provide certain protections to journalists who are facing very dangerous and challenging situations. What could be, or what are some of the interventions that the Committee to Protect Journalists tries to put in place in order to ensure the safety, welfare, and well-being of journalists in general, like in the whole world globally, and in the Middle East and the Gaza region in particular? If you can give us some examples, please.
Sure. So the organization, as I said, it's a non-for-profit. We have both our research and documentation, which includes counting the casualties, those who've been killed, injured, who went missing, put in jail, and of course, speaking up and demanding investigation, including in cases where we saw Israeli army culpability, evidence that they have targeted journalists. And with those, we have also demanded that they are being investigated internationally through the International Criminal Court. But also in the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, we've demanded that it would be investigated by the federal government and through the FBI. In addition, of course, we in our advocacy have demanded and continue to ask for immediate ceasefire since October. And we've been providing assistance to Palestinian journalists, basic needs through partners on the ground, including the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, Palestiniyat, a woman journalist group, and the regional group Arij, who are providing also equipment and other direct assistance to journalists. We, of course, most of our time, we're using our research and documentation in communicating directly, not just with the Israeli army or the Israeli government, but Israeli government allies, including the US government at the highest level. And we saw how Secretary Blinken used our numbers and demanded investigation after we met with Secretary Blinken into the killing of Osama Abdullah, the Reuters correspondent, for example. We've also raised it with US and foreign policy makers and UN investigators, Human Rights Council members. And we continue to investigate those cases that we, at least 12 of them, that we see direct targeting with international groups to independently verify the circumstances behind their deaths. And of course, these are all because we believe in international law that provides journalists with civilian protections, and that includes making sure that the Israeli not use lethal force against journalists or media facilities.
Sharif, I want to ask you also about the different roles that journalists have been playing in the midst of covering the Gaza crisis in particular. We talked about the dangers, we talked about the threats, we talked about the challenges that these journalists have been obviously facing. But my question to you is, what roles did they actually play in the midst of this conflict in terms of their coverage? And what is your own assessment and evaluation of their own coverage and the maybe accuracy or professionalism of this coverage, please?
Well, the journalists in Gaza who have faced unprecedented threats and paid um, never seen before sacrifices, risking their life, the lives of their colleagues and their families. They have reshaped what it means to be a frontline journalist today and a war reporter today. By paying those sacrifices, of course, they served as eyewitnesses, providing testimonials about the impact of the war, things like the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike, covering as much as possible the suffering, the stories, and from hospitals showing the number of journalists, the number of Gazan being killed, wounded all throughout the war. And of course, that's a content that's mainly produced visually. That's why a lot of them are photojournalists and people who even work as freelancers with international media. And many of them, of course, do not have the support of a newsroom behind them, but also continue to show up and document every day. Of course, a lot of those journalists have seen their own homes destroyed. Some have seen their media outlets destroyed over the course of the war. We have documented more than 50 media offices, mainly local Palestinian media offices who've been bombed and destroyed in Israeli bombardment, and many of them had to flee south, seeking a safe haven when there was none, and seeking an exit when there is none. A lot of them are currently concentrated around Rafah, hoping to be spared, but there are some that continue to report even in Gaza in the north, where it's the most dangerous for anyone to be there.
Absolutely, big hurdles for sure. Mr. Ali was talking earlier about the discrepancy in the international and Western media handling of different conflicts and crises, how they have been framing, for example, the struggle of the people and the journalists in Ukraine versus the dehumanization, I should say, and decontextualization of the coverage of Gaza and the portrayal of the people in Gaza and the journalists covering the conflict as well. What is your take on your satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the way international media and Western media has been handling and covering this particular crisis, please?
Well, we at the committee, we are a press freedom group. We want to see diverse polarity of media. And of course, we consider freedom of speech as central to us. We are a non-for-profit and we defend all journalists, regardless of their political affiliations, but also regardless of their nationality. The idea that we put down a journalist or be indifferent to them because of their passport is dangerous and irresponsible. Uh, Impunity is like a virus and is like violence, knows no border. And of course, for journalists who, like in those in Gaza, who have paid a lot of sacrifice, immense sacrifices already, uh, any discrimination or indifference to them put them in further imminent harm.
Absolutely. But my question maybe is about your own observation. Let's say, as a citizen of the world, if you don't mind, like when you watch the different news organizations and the media broadcasting news about, for example, let's say the war in Ukraine versus the war on Gaza, right? What is your take in terms of some of the discrepancies or differences in the patterns and framings of these two different conflicts and maybe other conflicts as well?
Well, I think that's for other organization to track and document. We focus, as I said, on press freedom and freedom of speech. And because we believe in journalists and their role, providing timely, accurate, independent information and commentary. And that's mean trusting journalists to do their job, but also trusting editors to be fair, because we want to have a better understanding about the motivations behind both warring parties and the implications of their actions. We say we want press freedom because it is our way to hold governments accountable and to hold war parties accountable.
Absolutely. Let's talk about this point about accountability in particular. When we talk about the concept of accountability, if you can just define it in one or two lines for our own listeners and viewers, what does the term accountability mean when we talk about things like, press freedom and the protection of press freedom and journalists' right to report and to speak truth to power? What does accountability mean? And what are some of the suggestions or mechanisms whereby we can try to actually boost or increase the degree of accountability exercised by, let's say, for example, regimes or different media organizations? How can we try to improve and boost the concept of accountability?
Well, accountability, of course, starts with doing independent, transparent, and rapid investigations on all of the cases of journalists killed, but especially those where we see, of course, patterns like deadly pattern we saw. And what we hope is that these investigations, of course, are done publicly. Like when we said we supported the FBI investigation, it's been now close to 2 years in May since Shireen Abu Akleh had been killed, and more than a year and a half after we saw reports of the FBI conducting their own investigation, but we have not heard as of today anything about that investigation. So accountability means more transparency, knowing about the results, who was involved, and holding the perpetrators accountable. And that happens not just internally within Israel, but also with the Israeli allies, those who provide Israel with arms to follow human rights conditions in US law and other laws that make sure the end use of those arms are not violating international law, but even US law, current law, like the Leahy law, which of course was invoked by Leahy himself in the conduct of Israeli army when killing Shireen Abu Akleh. We want to make sure that it's being enforced and invoked on the Israeli army use to make sure they are held accountable, not just the one soldier or one unit, everyone who was involved in killing journalists. There's also by calling out and demanding directly and publicly that Israel changes its rules of engagements, the way it uses its weapons to make sure they do not kill more journalists in the future. And these are all, of course, part of what we mean with seeking justice. We want to see people, even sanctions, in systems like Khashoggi bans that prevents citizens, including even recently Magnitsky sanctions against settlers of Israel who are involved in human rights violations, from coming to the US as visitor or target assets they might have or financial engagements abroad. All of these, of course, are measures of accountability. But of course, we want to see prosecutions in court, criminal prosecution that results in the families of those journalists, most of all, knowing their loved ones have found justice.
Very good. Thank you so much. We'll come back to this very important and timely discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600. Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493. At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arab Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, another great episode of the program, The Bridge on US Arab Radio. And we are discussing today the challenges and the threats facing journalists internationally and within the ongoing Gaza crisis in particular. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are my guests, Mr. Sherif Mansour from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and Mr. Ali Younes, a veteran journalist who has been covering the Middle East and US politics. Sherif, I want to talk to you about the future trajectories. What are the lessons learned? I mean, obviously, we've been talking about, all of these challenges, all of these threats, what journalists have been suffering from globally and internationally, as well as in the Middle East region, and especially amid the ongoing Gaza crisis. So are there any certain lessons that have been learned from all of that that should be taken into consideration and taken into account when we talk about future trajectories?
Well, I think the Gaza war, of course, will have long lasting and far reaching consequences for the press in the region and beyond. Um, of course, what we saw happen is unprecedented. And we said this is the most dangerous and the most deadly environment we have seen on the record. And we have seen, of course, other trends, including the blackout, communication and news blackout enforced at least 7 times. And I don't think we should accept having this as a practice, not even in time of war, even in time of peace. We cannot accept that journalists have to sacrifice their life and the lives of their loved one, colleagues, and family members in order to do their job. We have reached a near record number with 99 journalists last year. The only other number more was in 2015 when the Islamic State and the Middle East wars have propelled the number of journalists more than 100 at the time. And when that happened, we saw a lot investment on how to make sure there are protections enshrined in UN resolution and commitments about impunity, which is now a day we celebrate every November. And we, of course, would like to see same happen, a response by the media industry, by policymakers to shore up ways of accountability and transparency in order to make sure that journalists can continue to be on the front lines and doing their job without suffering such heavy casualties.
Absolutely, I cannot agree more, Sharif. But there is a very big question here, maybe the elephant in the room, as they call it, right? When we talk about things like impunity, when we talk about things like, international accountability, we cannot also, turn a blind eye to the fact that there are also international organizations, international bodies, governments, big regimes that have been part and parcel of this whole tragedy as it has been unfolding. I'm talking here about the suffering of journalists worldwide, and especially amid the ongoing Gaza crisis. I mean, maybe somebody would shrug their shoulders and say, okay, this is all beautiful, but what can be possibly really done moving forward in the future in order to make sure we implement certain specific, pragmatic, practical measures that can be put in place in order to keep everybody in check and ensure more accountability and protection for journalists moving forward?
I think, first of all, as I said before, investigations, serious, transparent, and rapid investigations to hold the perpetrators accountable. And that can happen with international criminal court investigation, with the FBI investigation in the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, and other sanction system against those who abuse U.S. arms and other arms supply agreements to Israel. Of course, we cannot seek any accountability unless, of course, there is an end to the censorship in Gaza and in Israel. For example, when we said before, the long-standing record of impunity by the Israeli army needs to face public scrutiny. That can only happen by allowing international news organization and international investigators, UN investigators, immediate access to Gaza. And that means that the Israeli government should not hide any information about their conduct in the Gaza war, so that they are held accountable as well within Israel and outside Israel.
Very important points indeed. Thank you so much. We'll come back to this very important and timely conversation right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We're talking today about the threats and challenges facing journalists worldwide in the year 2023 and amid the ongoing Gaza crisis in particular. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are my guests, Mr. Sherif Mansour from the Committee to Protect Journalists and Mr. Ali Younes, an independent veteran journalist. Mr. Ali, I want to come to you with a question about, the role of international community as well as international organizations, committees like the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, other organizations. Do you honestly believe that they're doing enough in terms of putting in place measures to protect journalists worldwide and in places like the Middle East region and Gaza in particular? Or do you feel that more needs to be done? And if you think more needs to be done, what are some of your recommendations in that regard, please?
Well, I think they are doing a lot of good work, and I commend them for what they're doing, but I don't think it's enough. And I don't blame them for it because they don't have actions or powers, legal powers or investigative powers to hold people accountable in a legal way, or government accountable in a legal way. But I want to say journalists also are citizens of some country. They are human beings. If they get killed or imprisoned, it is the duty of their governments or their country to defend them or to get them out of jail or to hold those who killed them accountable. So a journalist is not just a journalist. He's also a citizen and a human being, a father or a mother or a brother or a sister. And I think from that perspective, when we neglect to hold government accountable or the perpetrators who commit crimes against journalists in the course of their own duty, or to prevent certain investigations of corruption or illegal activities by certain groups or certain governments, that in of itself should call to questions why certain governments turn a blind eye, and why international organizations and human rights organizations don't push more vigorously and more forcefully to defend those journalists that they are saying that we are out there to defend them. And of course, when we talk about the Middle East is the worst place for journalists, whether by the Middle Eastern governments or by Israel, as we have seen, has done a lot of things that are illegal. And a lot of governments, a lot of organizations, international organizations, say what Israel has been doing toward Palestinian journalists or other journalists are illegal. And they've killed an American journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh. And it was the duty and it's still the duty of the U.S. government, because Shirin Abu Akleh is an American citizen, and as an American citizen, the U.S. government or the FBI should investigate that. But we have seen none of that. We saw that Israel was not being held accountable for the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh, and they still have denied that, and the U.S. government, still not trying to be forceful. Compare that. Russia is detaining 2 American journalists, and wrongly, and the U.S. government should defend them and get them out of there. But we've seen the U.S. government is bargaining hard with Russia, and we see, Wall Street Journal journalists, and we see a lot of U.S. media covering that issue and try to get these, falsely imprisoned journalists or accused journalists out of there. But we don't see the same vigor or the same effort being applied toward Palestinian or Arab journalists who are either being wrongly killed and wrongly imprisoned by either Israel or some Middle Eastern governments. So a lot of people in our region, the Middle East, they see the double standards, or sometimes they describe it as discriminatory, and it's a cultural bias or cultural supremacy by Europeans or Americans toward the global South in general, whether African or the Middle East or Indian, and maybe sometimes Latin America. So all these, apples and oranges issues is at play here, and it's quite an unfortunate situation for everybody.
Absolutely. And speaking of double standards and apples and oranges, I also wanted to get your take as a veteran journalist who've been covering the Middle East and also public affairs in the United States. The different patterns and frames through which different conflicts have been covered in the media, in international media. When you look, for example, at the war on Ukraine versus the war on Gaza, what have you seen as some of the discrepancies, the differences, the gaps, the frames that need to be highlighted, please?
Well, as you mentioned, 2 different framing and 2 different verbiage or language is being used for both conflicts. The Ukrainian war is framed as a freedom for the Ukrainian people, and rightly so. But it was framed by the U.S. media, European media. That was our duty as European liberal West and the U.S. to defend Ukraine and positive stories and cast bad light on Putin or the Russian apparatus or the Russian war machine or the Russian soldiers or what have you. So you see that, and from the Russian perspective, I'm sure they think this is a bias. Ukraine is such and such, and the U.S. media and the biased media, of course, this is a power play. When it comes to our issues, the beginning of the crisis in Gaza, or the war on Gaza last October, we saw a huge rush in the U.S. and European media to cover it, and with the focus on the victimhood of the Israeli victims. And there, of course, some victims in Israel, civilian victims, I'm saying here, but the disproportionate coverage always favored Israel, and the pro-Israel supporters in Europe and the global West, I should say, always try to cast a negative light on the Palestinian stories. And they don't get a lot of coverage or a lot of minutes on TV. A lot of people who support the Palestinian perspective don't have a lot of room or a lot of minutes or a lot of space in international or respected newspapers, either in the US and Europe. And we saw European outlets always trying to have whoever wants to speak a pro-Palestinian perspective on their media outlets, they have to pre-qualify him to condemn Hamas. So if you don't condemn Hamas as a pre-qualification for you to say anything, you're not allowed to say anything. We never saw that in other conflicts, or in Ukraine, or in Latin America, or in Africa. So in the minds of the Arab world and the Muslim world in the region, they have lost faith in all these, nevertheless, great organizations, human rights, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, the committee to the CPJ, the committee to protect journalists, they have lost faith in that. Even they lost faith in the United Nations that failed to prevent the war, the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, or the International Court of Justice. So it has a huge impact on the region, the crisis that we see today.
We can say maybe a credibility crisis in terms of the legitimacy and credibility of international organizations,
yes,
as well as the credibility of international regimes or even superpowers. Have you been following also the coverage of the Arab media for this crisis? I'm sure. What are some of your takes in terms of the roles that have been shown and played by Arab journalists in terms of the coverage of this crisis and the discrepancies that you have seen compared to Western coverage?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, Sahar, because we don't want to just pick on the European media, because our own media in the Arab world also, they have the same power play. It depends on what country this media organization is operating from. You see, Al Jazeera is leading voice in covering this war at the great tragic expense, at the great price, the human price, on Palestinian journalists who work for Al Jazeera. While Dahdour, he suffered a huge tragedies. He lost his wife, his son, and other journalists. They've been killed, and but their coverage also, it has to do with a lot the politics of the region as well, and other parts of the Arab world. Also, their coverage, follows the policies of the countries they operated from, just like U.S. media, take a cues from what the U.S. government is positioned on this or position on that, or lobbying groups, and Europeans the same. In the Arab world, there's the same dynamics. It's power dynamics. So the word to be objective, it's not necessarily a proper word here, but for me, what I always try to say, I always try my best to be fair, as much as possible. As a human being, I cover things from the way I see it as correct, because a journalist has a duty to report the truth and speak truth to power and cover as much as he can. And I don't call for journalists to be heroes to die while covering. I mean, their duty also to protect themselves and their families. But the Arab world is not, I should say, is not immune from the issues that we've discussed in the European media or U.S. media.
Absolutely. As I always tell my students, there is no such thing as 100% complete freedom of the press anywhere, and there is no such thing as 100% complete objectivity anywhere. So I'm glad that you raised these issues as well. Let's end with a brief answer, please, about the future. I asked this question also to Sherif, and I want to ask the same question to you to end with it, please. So briefly, when you look at the future, in terms of the future trajectory, what the patterns, the trends, what can we possibly see moving forward in terms of the protections for journalists? How can we make the situation safer and better for them, moving forward? What can be done in order to improve all the issues and challenges we have been talking about all along today?
Well, sadly, I don't see an end, a light at the end of this tunnel so far, because in our region, as long as we don't have strong human rights protections, because a journalist, in addition to him being as a journalist, he has rights as a citizen of a certain country. He should have constitutional rights, and the Middle East is deficient when it comes to protections, constitutional protections, or human rights protections that should also extend for him being a journalist, or the right to have access to information. We don't have that, and that is not. I don't cast the blame 100% on the government, but also journalists in our region. And I know, and I'm sure you know, and a lot of people know, that a lot of journalists in the Middle East, they also play at the hands of the regimes. A lot of them, maybe ethics is not a big value issue for them. News organizations, maybe ethics is lacking in some sort. So that being said, I believe a lot has to be done. Brave journalists should always stand and speak the truth and defend, because their duty is to bring information to the public. A journalist's duty is to bring news to the public, and that's their first and foremost duty. A journalist is a public figure, and they should always, speak for the public, not for the government.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I cannot agree more that this is the duty. The main duty of a journalist is to speak truth to power, despite all the challenges and difficulties and threats that he or she might face. I'm afraid we ran out of time. And with that, I would like to thank our guests today, Mr. Sherif Mansour from Committee to Protect Journalists and Mr. Ali Younes, a veteran Arab American journalist who has been covering the Middle East and American politics for a long time. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all our listeners and viewers everywhere. Stay safe and goodbye.